Hi, in this session, I'm going to talk about how to use the competing values framework to develop balanced nonprofit managers and organizations. And the first slide of what I'm going to cover is really translating the ideas behind the competing values framework into a nonprofit or ministry context. So the basics of the competing values framework is you have a 2x2 grid, and you're going to either be more internally focused or more externally focused. And then at the top bottom would be how flexible you're going to be versus how focused you're going to be. And the four quadrants you have, I'm translating into nonprofit or ministry terms. So on the internal flexible quadrant, that's called the CLAN or the collaborate quadrant. The tagline is do things together. It's really focused on long-term people development, and that's really at the core of ministry values. So these are your program people, generally, that are in the front lines of the organization. Now, often, and the idea behind competing values is you have a tension between these values. So you have your compete quadrant, and that's do things fast as their tagline, more market-oriented, short-term performance, and more in business value. So this is, the organization is going to have to do fundraising and things along those lines. And often those are culturally in tension with each other. And then you have the create quadrant. So that's the entrepreneurs do things first. That's the startup values. And then you have the control quadrant, and that's hierarchy, do things right, and do things more incremental. So this would be incremental innovation. This is breakthrough innovation. And that's more in the governance values. Now, in City Vision University and in our programs, you're going to see that this is kind of almost like a theme song. You know how Star Wars, the movie series, has theme songs that play throughout it. You're going to see the competing values framework come up again and again in our courses. And part of it is because it's a tool that helps you as an individual become more balanced and you as an organization become more balanced. Now, one of the ways you can assess, and we're not going to focus, this course is going to focus more on as an individual, but you can use this tool to assess organization's culture. And there's a tool called the Organizational Culture Assessment Instrument. And you can take this free test. It only takes about 15 minutes for your organization. And what it'll do is it'll draw a diagram of your organization according to those four different quadrants. And you can see what are the quadrants, at least according to your perception, that your organization is strongest in. And often it'll also show you what your industry looks like. So if you're in the education industry, it has an average profile, right? So City Vision, we did that. And the other thing that the OCAI instrument does is it allows you to say, here's where you are currently, and here's where you'd like to be. So we did this for City Vision just so you can see where we fall in terms of our values. And I'm very entrepreneurial, so we've been historically, honestly, too entrepreneurial, and we need to increase on our hierarchy and our market orientation. So that's part of what we're trying to do as an organization in order to be more balanced. So one other aspect that this tool is helpful is to talk about organizational life cycles. So organizations start off, and as you can imagine, this adhocracy or the startup quadrant, any startup is going to be very strong in that quadrant. And they might be able to bring in some revenue and, take decent care of their people. But often, these startups are like, we don't believe in any rules. There should be no policies. Policies are evil, right? And there's no hierarchy. And as an organization grows, it needs to, often become a little bit less on the creative, expand the CLAN, and then start to, institute more policies. And then what happens is after an organization's been around for a long time, all of a sudden it becomes very bureaucratic. The policies are dominating. And this is fine if you're in an industry that doesn't change very often, like say you manufacture paper, that may not have a whole lot of changes, to the industry. But if your organization is, say, in high tech or the web or something like that, then this is going to be a problem. And you can see this life cycle with Microsoft. It started off very entrepreneurial, and then it became very bureaucratic. And ultimately, what needs to happen is the organization needs to be reinvented. And Microsoft actually was successful in reinventing itself. So, again, just as a reminder, how do these quadrants relate to the different courses City Vision offers and the different competencies you can have as a nonprofit manager? So we have the ministry and relational competencies that relate to this list of courses here. We have the business and funding competencies, just how you're raising money and balancing the budget, and the operations and governance competencies, so accounting and nonprofit startup, and then you have your entrepreneurial competencies. And part of what we want you to do is we want you to assess who you are as a person, what are your skills, and where you need to grow in terms of balance. So there is a tool called the Workplace Behavioral Profile Competency Skills. And what that tool allows you to do is it allows you in a more general way to say, as a manager, and this is both nonprofit and business manager, what are your strengths? So, and there's different categories. They have a facilitator, which encourages participation, a mentor, developing people, empathizer. And then on the other side, you have the competitor, the producer, the driver, and then in the control quadrant, the regulator, the monitor, the coordinator, and then the visionary, innovator, and motivator. And the idea behind this, so we have a workplace behavioral profile Google spreadsheet that you can use. And what you're going to do is you're going to go through this spreadsheet and you're going to put an X for each of these items. So you'll start off, and let me just go ahead and open up that spreadsheet. So you'll start off on the instructions, and it explains, what you need to do. That the first thing you need to do is go to the file menu, say make a copy, and then rename it Workplace Behavioral Profile, and then your name. And then you're going to go to the Workplace Behavioral Profile Self tab, and then you're going to put an X in whatever column and I think it has to be a lowercase x. And then it'll put a value here. And then what it's going to do is these values are going to get totaled, and then you're going to get a results table here. Then you're going to get a competency map, and you're going to get summary bar chart, competency bar chart. So, so that's going to be one of your assignments for this week. And the idea is it's going to give you kind of a map of where you are and where you might, want to be. So it'll give you a result that looks something like this for yourself. And, depending on where this map is, it'll show you, okay, as I talked about, you want to move from an I to a T. The I might, this profile here, you can see they major in innovation. They minor in kind of this business quadrant, but they're weaker in these quadrants. So they want to go deeper in these two quadrants if they're in our program, but they also want to round out their skills by developing these quadrants. Now, if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs personality type, I'm just going to go over this slide really quickly, but the people who developed this workplace behavioral profile also mapped some of the Myers-Briggs personality type variables onto this. So it might help you better understand how these relate. So, extroverts are often more extroverts, and people who are Ps in the Myers-Briggs, and Ns are often more in the entrepreneurial quadrant. And then ISTJ is more in this quadrant. Thinking, feeling is, the bottom versus the top. And those are just some overall overlaps. If you're not familiar with Myers-Briggs, you don't really need to know it, but some of you will just find that interesting. So one of the key questions is to what extent do you want to take courses in your strengths and your weaknesses? Now, whenever I talk to new students coming into City Vision, I often ask them, what's your goals? Do you want to, major in your strengths? If you're playing a sport and you're right-handed, do you want to just get your right hand really strong, or do you want to work on both your left and right hand? So, and what I find is ministry people will come in and they'll take our ministry courses and they'll love our ministry courses. And then they'll take business courses and they can barely tolerate the business courses. They don't like those business courses. And often they'll hate the accounting courses. But we have them take all the courses. And part of what happens, I've noticed also that, whatever quadrant that isn't your dominant quadrant, whenever I went to school, I'm very entrepreneurial. And whenever I had to take things that were more in this governance quadrant, I really didn't like those courses. I argued with the teacher. I actually thought the whole mindset of the teacher was wrong. And honestly, I wasn't very teachable because of that attitude. And I noticed that's common with a lot of our students. So, if you're experiencing a course and you're like, I noticed this is in my weak area and I don't like this course, recognize that and just recognize it'd be like practicing with your offhand, that you may not enjoy it, but, it's like eating your vegetables. It's good for you. So, think about how you're doing a T-shaped education. You want to go deeper in your dominant quadrant and you want to go broad. Now, part of the reason for that is if you look at what happens if you don't do that, then you can see for each quadrant what happens if you get off balance. So, and I'll start off with the collaborate quadrant. So they say if you get off balance on that, you have endless discussion, unproductive participation, very emotional, very individualistic, and you are like an irresponsible country club. You're just serving the members, but not having any impact, and you have a slow death. If you only do create, then you have this tumultuous anarchy. You hear about these startups that are just tumultuous, and you have ungrounded vision. The guy who says we're going to go to the moon, but has no practical plan for that. You have a different program of the week, and that can be a problem. So compete, you can become, way too driven. You can be tyrannical with your goal focus, and you can become an oppressive sweatshop. And then control, you could have too much micromanagement, too much overregulation, and you could have this stifling bureaucracy. And the idea is in any organization, you want to try to maintain balance. So the same thing is true for individuals. So you are trying to go for these items in bold. So the strength of collaboration is it's good at caring and concern and engagement. And the strength of competing is autonomy and confrontation and challenge. So what you want is you want an integration of those, right? So you want to have caring confrontation. You want to have autonomous engagement, and the same thing across these dimensions. So the strength of the control quadrant is practical and reasonable. It's confident and assured. The create quadrant is hope and vision, and it's humble and teachable. So what you want is you want practical vision. You don't want to dream that you're going to go to the moon with no plan to get there, right? But you also want to not say that we're never going to dream. And then you want to have a teachable confidence. So ultimately, that's what the degrees at City Vision are about. And that's what we're trying to do in the degree program.